So I just want to wax poetic on this because this just keeps getting deeper and deeper here. The moment Jackie Robinson integrates baseball is the most important event in American civilizational history. And the reason why is because it compresses, condenses, and distills the foundational untruth or lie within language of the American Constitution and the founding of American civilization. It confronts that existentially through the lens of culture. And again, as we just discussed in the last video, culture. Culture is at the most foundational level, at the most literal brickwork of the everyday, the impact of the lives of the everyday person is the integration of the way of being. It's the mode of being which is represented through images. So the culture itself is a modality that is reflected back to humanity in a process of mimesis. It's a process of interrelationship through the inward projection outward of images, as in spectacle or theater or art. This is just what culture is at an existential psychological level. So the confrontation of Jackie Robinson stepping on the baseball field with the Brooklyn Dodgers in the spring of 1947 distills the essential internal conflict of the subconscious drama in terms of the epic shadow of racism and slavery. Literally, even, I'm going to go ahead and say this, the projection outward of the shadow into a racialized archetype, as in the American popular segregationist perception and proception of the black person. It's a disjection of the psychic shadow into a material reality. It's totally unfounded on the real, as in the skin color dynamic creating some sort of strange fundamental difference in humanity and inhumanity. It's a projection of the psychological shadow of the unprocessed violence in the American cultural subconscious at large. This is, again, the roots of American history are built through slavery, through the justification of the transatlantic slave trade, the enslavement of black people in this country to build its monuments, its plantations, so on and so forth. And this fundamental class structure of quote unquote human inferiority or inhuman inferiority is what allows for America to exist and become what it becomes. So you have the founding with the Constitution, the transatlantic slave trade, which builds up the American South. Then you have the Civil War, right, which it's again is an economic conflict as well as a moral conflict over primacy of the American economy in the North with rising industrialization, and in the South with slavery as agricultural wealth and agricultural product. Again, it's both a moral battle for the soul of America and the psyche of America, just as much as it is an economic one in terms of power and control over the American. I guess you just call it a plutocracy, really, as it has always existed. Control over the legislative governing body of the country as a whole, the nation as a whole, as it continues to expand out west. So these are just lead up moments. So I went deep into this. The last document was actually completed on Hegel's birthday, which to me was a bit of a, big flashing lights moment of, I read Hegel when I was very, very young, much younger, about talking about the spirit of the age and reason in history, and talking about the idea that spirit evolves, right? There's a purpose in spirit. This is the concept of teleology, that history occurs and unfolds for a reason. And that reason is the evolution of consciousness or the integration of consciousness. So when you look at the big picture, the integration of consciousness across the cosmos and all scales of existence is the recognition of the unity of the universe itself. You have theorists who have approached this in the past with unified field theory, for instance, or Spinoza with the monad, Leibniz as well. These thinkers tend to be transdisciplinary thinkers. They pull together many different conceived or conceptual silos of thought and intellect, knowledge and reason, and realize, right, as Da Vinci says, everything is connected to everything else. So the purpose in a grand cosmological scale is for the universe to become conscious of itself, to achieve self recognition within a body or a mode of conception of thinking, wherein the highest level of possibility is an unrealized quantum architecture of self recognition through consciousness, as in a being or a vessel or a nervous system becoming conscious through the evolution of the brain or another system of cognition, and having the ability to reflexively think back upon itself or reflect upon itself. This again is Kierkegaard's process or concept of dialectical redoubling. It is the concept that's reflected in a biblical sense through Job. Job thinking about the mechanism of God, thinking about creation, and therein forming a faculty of judgment, forming a faculty of rationality, which is evolutionarily the forebrain. That has existed for the past couple hundreds of thousands of years, as opposed to the hindbrain, which is called quote unquote the reptilian brain, which is millions and millions of years. You have this long timescale process of evolution, which cultivates the mechanism or the technology of the human being, which is capable of, through the process of this radical cognitive architecture, which occurs as a form of technology of nature, an organic technology, as in an organism, which is capable of radically reflecting back upon itself and conceiving of itself its true origins and thus its cosmological wholeness, right? This is what is reflected in history. This is the spirit of the age. This is the teleology of spirit becoming conscious through the model of history, through time, through evolutionary space-time. It is a process of relationship, a process of reflection upon material conditions as well as immaterial conditions, as in psychic conditions, forming that ability to conceive of the relationship between the inward, as in the psychological state, how things are being perceived through the mechanism of the psyche, through the mechanism of cognition, and through the mechanism of the senses, and understanding how radically in relationship that method of perception and conception as an instrumental technology of humanity is to the perceived outward mode and model of the universe and the world. So this is the natural dichotomy of self and other, or self and world, or subject and object, that is formed through the perceptive mechanism of the organism itself. It looks outward and attempts to perceive. It looks inward and attempts to perceive. It attempts to perceive self and world, and it perceives a duality. It perceives a split, a difference between sensation, between perception, between identity, and it's this process of trying to reconcile this seeming radical opposition. Psychologically, in terms of this mode of projection or cultural cognitive model of projection, collectively, you're having something that's almost so base and so fundamental, as in the mechanism of racism as it historically occurs, a process of projecting outwardly bad qualities, quote unquote bad qualities, onto the perceived shadow, the perceived darkness that exists on the outside. This is very much so in the same way that someone experiences an innate fear when they perceive literally darkness set onto the world. You have the famous quotes from Fanon in forgetting which book. I'll have to go back. I included it in one of the previous ones, where he encounters a white French woman and her child on the street in Algeria, and she shields her child in fear. There's this sense, right? Again, there's this psychological model that is being projected outwardly at a collective level upon a perceived body of information, a individual, an organism that has perceived innate bad or negative qualities at a collective, cultural, constructive level of information. Again, the cultural psyche is an information technology as a collective, which is being informed by the culture itself. This is very important. It's that you have a large body, whether that's the United States of America, whether that's the Western civilization, which is itself a construct of collectivity, and that construct of collectivity is receiving feedback and is engaged in feedback loops with the cultural information, which is the architecture of that group at large. Whether that's philosophy, whether that's the legislative body of government, whether that's literature, whether that's art or music or cinema, whatever those models are, they're an information technology, as in a mirroring of the psychological status of that large cultural body itself. This is the idea of pop culture. It's resonating with a large group of people. It represents itself the consensus mode and model, wherein that civilizational architecture stands as a collective psyche, as a collective consciousness, as a collective cognition. So you're witnessing in real time this process. It's radical psychological immaturity that you're witnessing in this early pre-modern American architecture of brutal slavery, brutal enslavement, brutal dehumanization, which can really be described in no other way other than as a deep psychological immaturity and an unprocessed group shadow dynamic, which is being projected outward onto a group of people in order to scapegoat them and avoid dealing with the real situational reality that is occurring at that moment in time through that psychic aperture or that lens of perception in that group of, or that body of humanity itself. So if you think about Western civilization and Western philosophy and Western theology at that moment of time, what you're looking at through those modes is you're just looking at a status of being, a status of self-conception, and a journey toward radical unity, which is precipitated by minds like Spinoza or Leibniz, minds which are, through this radical polymathy, through this radical transdisciplinary thought and consciousness, sculpting the possibility for a total transcendent unity to be experienced within the architecture of being human itself. This is the journey of all philosophy and the journey of all history and the journey of the universe in terms of a ability to, within the body or within the moment in space-time, perceive and be present with the quantum cognitive architecture of the universe itself, which is a total singularity, as in it exists in all spaces and all places at all times, as a total form of presence. This is actually something that's very profound within the mode of athletics, and is described in Taoism as the concept of Wu Wei, which is athletic flow. It's total presence of the aperture and the mode of being, as in an intense focus or an intense attention, and through that attention, a solidification and a synthesis of presence within that present moment. Trying to describe it is very difficult, but it's a way of solidifying the quantum architecture of existence and directing it towards a purpose. It's that the idea is that the universe is entirely creative energy, which is unconscious and yet unharnessed, as nature is a process of technology building and sculpting through this unconscious process of trying to fit together the elemental building blocks, which are the construct of all compounds that exist physically in form in the universe, which are being born from the stellar forge of stars. These elemental compounds are being disjected from this stellar forge and are being recombined in the process of creating organisms, forms, materials, etc. Right? So this is the appearance of existence. And this itself, it goes very deep into the psychological architecture of the human, because we are doing the same process of metabolism of the psyche as it is occurring in the everyday life of the individual and the collective. We ourselves are moving, as Nietzsche says, we're on a tightrope between animal or beast and God, in the sense that we are moving from a constricted, unconscious, natural mode of self-construction, the technology of nature as a latent, unconscious mode of unprocessed energy, latent energy, in reproduction, in consumption of food, right, in metabolism. All of these different ways that the unconscious will of nature is structured genetically and presented as an unconscious terabit, so to speak, of information, which is the human being, and to radically, through consciousness, alter and reconstruct that architecture through will, through awareness, through perception of the situation and status of the human and the possibilities energetically and psychically of the human being to achieve real self-recognition in a cosmological sense. Recognition of those possibilities, recombinating them through the literal physical architecture of the human being, the nervous system, the metabolism, the organs, the digestive system, the synapses of the brain, recombinating them and harnessing, in that sense, the real conscious immediate will of the universe through and into profound high aesthetic movement processing, whether that's philosophy or athletics, right? Again, we talked about this in terms of baseball. Baseball as an athletic is a devotion of the metabolic will or the force of the creation of the universe as a nuclear fusion into the process of a creative art form, which involves metabolism, which involves the energy of the body, which involves the exertion of the force of will, which moves the body, right? We're talking about the fundamental principles of the universe. Again, force equals mass times acceleration, the generation of that force towards something which is an aesthetic product is fundamentally inessential or unessential to creating and sustaining and constructing and recreating through reproduction human life. It's a radical, radical, radical form of the transformation of the will. So you're already dealing with that level of revolutionary technology. We went over baseball as a nonviolent sport that's dedicated toward precision and attention and using technology, prosthetics, the bat, the ball, the glove, to simulate this radical cognitive architecture of the universe through the process of physics and transformation of the metabolic force of will. We already went over that. But furthermore, to understand that baseball becomes, in this deep unconscious way, the prime cultural artifact of the American political and social subconscious, the underdwelling or the underpinning of all of American civilizational processing of the psyche. And that's what the prime cultural artifact is. America's pastime is just America's way of processing the psyche through culture as a mirror to its psychic condition, as a mirror to its unconscious, conscious battle of the dynamics of separation between realization and the unconscious forces and factors and dynamics which are operating beneath the surface of real knowledge and real awareness. The reason it becomes this is precisely because it is the highest aesthetic technology that America produces. It creates a incredibly sophisticated form of sport, again, through the things we talked about: strategy, focus, attention, the difficulty of hitting a baseball, the use of technological prosthetics to as instruments, right, to orchestrate this this procession or this theater of forms, right? We went very deep into that. And it becomes, right, through this unconscious sophistication, this creative generation of an entire mode of being and processing, becomes America's pastime, America's cultural phenomenon. So through that lens, right, understanding that when Jackie Robinson sets foot on the field of baseball, it is the primary foundational cultural artifact and mechanism of America's subconscious processing of everything, of its existence, of its meaning, of its spiritual existence, its spiritual nature. We went deep into baseball as a form of theology or active worship, really, of the forces of the universe themselves. You have these temples, Ebbets Field, Polo Grounds, right? So Jackie Robinson steps onto Ebbets Field for the first time wearing a Brooklyn Dodgers uniform in the industrial, cultural, and economic epicenter of the United States, and at this point, really of the world, New York City. What's really happening there is, at the deepest level, the United States is coming face to face with its foundational subconscious architecture, the disjected element itself, which is Black life, Black existential meaning, Black culture, as it intersects with the civilizational cultural mechanism or aperture of the perception of American being, identity, and collectivity itself, baseball. This is different than the Civil War, and this happens, 10, 15, 20 years before Brown versus Board. This is a very revolutionary moment. It's different than the Civil War in terms of the abolition of slavery, because, and it's different than the creation of the Constitution, because what it does is it reveals at the deepest, most foundational level, it's a statement in terms of a real practice of being as an integrative cultural phenomenon. The national artifact is being entered by in Jackie Robinson being a representative of this. The entire culture and community of the collective subconscious, violently oppressed aspect of American civilization, which is Black history. So when you have this happen, again, you can look, let's say you can look, 70 years into the future, and you see the election of Barack Obama as the first Black president, and then you see the backlash that comes from that election after his second term. You see that in coalition with Jackie Robinson, and you see the era of Jim Crow and Reconstruction after the Civil War and the struggle for reparations for Black people with Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, the Black Panther Party, and the free lunch program. What you're really seeing is this massive, massive, massive undercurrent of political energy, which is the rising up into the American collective consciousness through subconscious recognition, which is an active force, right? These are human people who are assembling and declaring their humanity through these radical, quote unquote radical, which are really just human movements into culture, right? The free lunch program for school children by the Black Panthers, Jackie Robinson entering into the cultural institution of American professional baseball for the first time. You're witnessing a psychic revelation of the disjected underground of the American political and cultural subconscious into form. And when you see the backlash that happens with Jackie Robinson, the intense backlash, it's something that you also see with Hank Aaron when he breaks the home run record, Babe Ruth's home run record a couple of decades later. You're witnessing that backlash is the immaturity of the collective consciousness having to reckon with the just the political reality of a collective humanity, which it is not yet willing to accept or incorporate, or even as it maybe is not even able to understand due to its deep psychological immaturity. Again, this is all stuff we are still reckoning with. None of this has gone anywhere. But this moment of time, to again go back to Hegel, just so important. It's a revelation of the spirit of the age. It's a form of biblical revelation in the sense of psychedelic revealing of the unconscious through this moment where Jackie Robinson as an individual is shouldering this almost super heroic burden of being the representative in human form of this mass psychological force of the unfolding of history in terms of separation, fragmentation, and integration. And integration being the progressive force which moves all history forward. Integration, in the most fundamental term, being a metaphysical unity, which is perhaps most allied to Hegel and Spinoza and these Western historical philosophers and thinkers who conceive of history as a movement forward into unity, movement forward into transcendental unity of the cosmos. This, again, is the term singularity, which I find fascinating when it's used in an artificial intelligence context. Because really what we're talking about is that the history as an evolution of consciousness is just a movement towards singularity, as in the revelation of a transcendental unity, which is necessarily a recollection of the disjected body of nature. Right, all of the elements of fragmented psyche, which have occurred through human evolution, brutality of survival, in-group, out-group psychodynamics, civilizational constructs which have committed incredible acts of violence, both with a shrug and with a total unconsciousness. Right, we're reckoning with and grappling with the rising into consciousness of the primacy of all of being through natural forms, through organic forms. Each species evolves and through evolution acquires natural characteristics which are undergirding and pushing and buoying consciousness forward as a force. Human beings themselves, as a millions and millions and millions of years process of evolution, have acquired characteristics which have made consciousness increasingly possible. So when you witness the teleological unfolding of history, you're witnessing culture itself as a mass generative mirror to the rising of consciousness. And as such, you have things like Occupy Wall Street, you have the cell phone, you have TikTok, you have the civil rights movement, you have industrialization. You have all of these different forms which massively accelerate, exponentially accelerate into the 20th century due to difficult to say. Due to, I think, in large part, the revolutionary movements that are occurring dating back to the French Revolution, the Haitian Revolution, and the American Revolution. These are revolutions that are occurring simultaneously that imply a shared humanity at a foundational level. So when you have this movement towards mass humanism, and again, this could even go further back towards Dante and the invention and creation of humanism in Italy around the 14 and 1500s, as well as the Renaissance movement. So you have these movements that increasingly gather steam throughout centuries, which include figures like Da Vinci or Michelangelo, who are revealing the architecture of unity, which is a cosmological architecture of being. Galileo says that a glass of wine is sunlight mixed with water. It's an incredibly fluent way to understand what we can now understand through technology and advanced profusion of different scientific disciplines as a process of recombination of elements and the furnace of stars. Again, this is like a transcendental unity which occurs at the level of cosmos and cosmology, but then trickles down through scales in a nesting doll effect, is in the term that I previously used, a thermodynamic nesting doll effect, wherein forms acquire these same essential principles and act them out through a process of reaching back up towards and for that transcendental unity through the ephemeral body of the physical form, the genetic form, the elemental, microbial, organismic, nervological form, so to speak. So you're witnessing this at the ground floor in culture as a process of integration in the American psyche, which is really a cosmological transcendental integration of unity within the self, which is being projected outward as a dynamic of segregation, fragmentation, dislocation, alienation, right? You have this descent in modern life deeper and deeper and deeper into this hole, which really existentialism in the mid 20th century really digs into. And again, Jackie Robinson, 1947. We're talking about Camus. We're talking about Sartre, right? We're talking about Simone Weil. We're talking about these thinkers who emerge at this exact moment and who are articulating the total loss of meaning, the total absurdity, which is the foundational and most fertile ground from that point for humanity to reckon with the cosmological architecture, the abyss which lies beneath its conceived, structured reality of drives and hungers, which are just the metabolic mechanism and the metabolism of the organism and the animal and the species itself, to go beneath that and to find the real cognitive architecture of existence itself, to become aware, right? To achieve real fundamental structural awareness of that which creates the universe itself. And this is enlightenment, this is awakening, right? And so through culture, you have this moment of Jackie Robinson, which is a radical reconciliation of this full arc of American civilization, a pinpointing moment where Jackie Robinson takes the field in the American cultural subconscious, the stadium, the field, the theater itself, and declares himself a part of baseball. He is declared a part of baseball, and he exists there. It cannot be taken back. It cannot be gone backward from. It can only be reckoned with. You have this reckoning, really, which Jackie Robinson, on the field of the everyday, becomes human. And he's there and he excels. And then from that point, you have the reaction. You have the reaction to this. You have the civil rights movement, which is a further entrenchment of this revolutionary political progressive phenomenon, which Jackie Robinson plays a huge part in. And then you have this progressive retrenchment, this attempt to draw back in time, to draw back in history to a moment where this had never happened. To become disintegrated, which again is the call of the immature, fragmented, disoriented psyche, which cannot reconcile this moment, which is the radical break in the history and time of American civilization, which really signals the end of American civilization, because the American civilization began with the foundational precept, the lie and the paradox of all men are created equal, except for black people and women in the United States, really, people who are not landowning white men. It's the foundational precept where the lie is being told legislatively and is playing out culturally. And then there's that moment where culturally, the culture actually moves first and revolutionizes first, and then the legislation comes after. because we're at this point we're between the abolition of slavery, which is then the Jim Crow era, just brutal cultural discrimination without slavery, I suppose. Um, and then you have Jackie Robinson, this cultural moment. It's a cultural radical progressive awakening into this push to integration at a psychological level. Um, and this is usually what happens, right? Culture innovates before the infrastructure celebrates, so to speak, right? Nietzsche, Spinoza. It's a precipitation of that which is to come. Um, and there's this opening, right? You see DeRocher in this photo. This is a 1947 Wire photo, just moments before Jackie Robinson is signed to the Brooklyn Dodgers and makes his debut. This actually occurred in Havana, Cuba, this spring training to anticipate, right, the intense racism that occurs and it was occurring in Florida at that time. They move it to Cuba, where this would be a more accommodating environment to make this transition. And DeRocher was notably a radical supporter of Jackie Robinson in this the process of integration. They literally came to blows a little later, just over, I think, competitiveness and difference in personalities, but reconciled with the understanding that they were both very much in support of each other. This moment here, it's a dislocation. Again, Cuba is so important. We've gone into it. There's no need to do it again. But Cuba is so important, as in it's like this third space. It's like the island of the American subconscious, and America tries to conquer it so much, right? Which is so interesting, because what Cuba is doing is it's radically in a liberatory fashion precipitating what America needs to do. It's doing it in advance of, because I think there's a native national consciousness there, which is well in advance of what America's is or has been. I think due to, in large part, being a small island, which has undergone very significant cultural, political, social evolution in very short periods of time, alongside the radical liberation and abolition movement intertwined, which occurred there in the mid to late 1800s, with baseball as a profound part of that architecture. There's a lot to be said there, but that's not necessarily the focus of where we are right now. So this moment is just so incredibly powerful, because it signals the end, as I would discern it, of American civilization, because the mechanism has been revealed. The subconscious rises into the consciousness. All men are created equal. Jackie Robinson steps on the field of baseball as the most important everyday cultural artifact, method of participation, method of communal engagement, method of civilization in America itself. It's not politics, it's not money, it's not businesses, it's baseball. Baseball is the theater, it is the place, it is the culture of America. So when he steps onto that field, American civilization ends, and the reckoning with the end of American civilization begins, because something has to come after that. There has to be new architecture. The awakening has occurred culturally. The spell has been broken. And this precipitates, again, the election of Barack Obama. It precipitates the American civil rights movement becoming what it becomes a decade and a half later, 2 decades later. It's when this breaks, it's different than Joe Louis. It's different than Jesse Owens. This is baseball. So having this happen is what you would call a civilizational singularity, because it's a collapse of the dualism. It's a collapse of the conscious-unconscious mechanism, which is the fundamental historical tension that conscious-unconscious mechanism weaves toward resolution, because it's inevitable that the unconscious will rise, because the unconscious is just naturally a part of everything else. You cannot disject the holistic unity of the cosmos into a psychological fracture, which just becomes your perspective. It's the same function as corporate capitalism. You can't destroy the rainforests of the earth and expect there not to be repercussions, or destroy the environments for short-term gain, right? It's a failure to understand how entire sustainable ecosystems and architectures function, and thus to interact positively with them, to ensure sustainability and to grow within them. It's a failure of recognition for perceived short-term gain. So when you function within that cognitive mode, inevitably the full force of the unconscious thrust of the unprocessed, unrecognized, unaware reality that you are attempting to perpetuate through this bubble of information. This is kind of a religiosity, if you think about it that way. It's a concept or a conceptual mechanism of reality or reality making or dreaming, which is incompatible with the laws of nature. And at a certain point, right, the laws of physics, they're there, right? And you'll feel the effects of them sooner rather than later. It's like having a very unhealthy diet. You can't put that food into your body. You can't put that energy or fuel into your body, like putting spoiled gas into a car, without the repercussions happening within the literal mechanism or the engine or the biosphere of the body itself. I mean, this has been long in the history of human beings. Particularly, I mean, to think about the genocide that occurs to Native American people in the United States, Native American people being the most culturally advanced people that have lived in America, right? The irony is just insane, because it's occurring from this deep subconscious survival drive, which is absolutely destroying, absolutely destructive, absolutely violent, which again, this is kind of the underpinning and the crux of Western civilization itself, is that it's a deeply psychologically wounded civilization, because it forgets its real roots. When you go back to Plato, when you go back to Greece, when you look at Greek philosophy being the real roots of Western civilization, that's deeply intertwined with the esoteric Greek, or the esoteric Egyptian and Hermetic Egyptian traditions, which are profoundly spiritual and are focused predominantly on the soul being reunified with the source of all creation, the soul being the individual or the spark or the vessel or the thing within space and time, being reunified with the quantum cognitive architecture of the universe itself, which is the formless. It's the eternal dimension. Rediscovering that, the ontology of creation. That was the framework, and that was the fabric of Western civilization when it was created. And that fabric was destroyed by a loss of consciousness, a dislocation from that foundational philosophical architecture which underpinned and undergirded the entire civilizational processes of early Western history. That's not something to go too deeply into now, other than to say this is a process of radical rediscovery of humanity through this actually very destructive, fragmented path of dislocation, which I think necessarily had to occur in one way or another, because what we're looking at now is a globalized architecture, a industrialized, globalized architecture of digital information, which is why this wire photo is so important. This was transmitted the next day from Havana to Chicago and put in the papers, announcing, really just precipitating Jackie Robinson's arrival. We have these architectures that were created through this intensely violent dark age, really. This dark age, which many people would call the Western civilization, right? It's a radically unconscious, dislocated, psychologically fragmented process through which humanity transforms very quickly and invents these technologies like the light bulb or like baseball or the wire photo. There are all of these different technological inventions that emerge from Western civilization through this dislocation, psychological fragmentation, that now create the situation where Western civilization itself has to actually remember what it did and remember what happened, and reckon with that there are actually tools and technologies that Western civilization has created that can help us at this point reach a higher level of transcendental unity than the previous cognitive architectures, such as the Mayans or the Aztecs, or even the Native Americans, who were living without the laptop or the cell phone as ways of communication, of transporting real information, physical material information, as in code, right? The architecture of the light on a screen, hundreds and thousands of miles across the earth. And that's what a wire photo is. It's literally a wire of the information, which is the image, which is then printed and reproduced almost immediately. These technological advances are our ability to integrate the deep ancient historical information, the cultures of profound spirituality in terms of search for meaning, search for truth, search for real recognition of humans' place in the universe, and as such, how to act, how to be, how to learn, how to live, to understand and cement and found that these technologies, in terms of the architecture of science, telescopes, the different fission devices that currently exist, we can use those to understand at a deeper level than ever before and unify through science these ancient metaphysical concepts and achieve a new level of cognition in terms of the holistic reality of the universe itself, the meaning of human being, and the possibility of achieving radical forms of self-awareness within this lifetime, radical forms of self-awareness within this body, and thus participating in a more meaningful way in existence itself. This is all very fertile ground, and we've discussed a lot of it already. A lot of it we've already kind of actually detailed, is that there is, through our new knowledges, through our new sciences, through our new technologies, we are now in a position to radically unify, not just at a cultural level in terms of a nation or a community, but a global level in terms of humanity itself, and a profound recognition of humanity and a profound recognition of life itself. It's just a unifying of these different psychological, philosophical, and scientific apertures together to present us with a meaning of life, with a possibility. And Jackie Robinson's just profoundly heroic act and courageous act of stepping onto this stage and really ending American civilization and presenting us with a post-American world, a world where the stage of America has been intercepted by the truth, intercepted by humanity, profound humanity. Pee Wee Reese puts his hand on Robinson's shoulder. Durocher supports Jackie. Jackie says, the meaning of a life is how it impacts other lives, right? This is just the most profound humanism that possibly exists. Jackie Robinson's getting berated. Pee Wee Reese puts his hand on his shoulder. Durocher says, if you don't like Jackie Robinson playing, pack it up and leave, because he's going to play, right? We're talking about profound humanism in this moment where they're in Cuba preparing for this onslaught, this backlash of cultural and civilizational deep psyche, unprocessed subconscious energy of violation, which is real violence being done to Black people in the United States, just profound violence. They're preparing for this profound reckoning of history. This moment is the most important moment in American history to me, beyond a shadow of a doubt. Obviously, the Civil War is incredibly important, but this moment, Jackie Robinson enters into the actual cultural institution and dominion of American history and declares himself and becomes one of the greatest players of all time. This is a moment of profound recognition of humanity, which breaks the spells which really existed as the predominant subconscious culture of American history and American civilization, forces a reckoning which is still reverberating to this day, because it occurred at the most fundamental ground. It wasn't a political idea. It wasn't a law written in a law book. It was Jackie Robinson stepping onto the field of baseball. That's what I got. Catch you on the next one.